are you so angry about? How's that for a question that just about all of us could probably be asked at some point on any given day, right? I think it's probably safe to say that not a week goes by, let alone rarely even a day, in which each of us at some point or another does not get angry about something. Whether it's some unkindness done to us, some disruption of our plans, some injustice, some injury, some jerk out on the road, right? Lately, how about just turning on the evening news, right? It's a constant, universal problem. Anger always seeming to be lurking nearby, waiting to grab hold of us, invariably with disastrous results. It has been called one of the greatest plagues of our age, in which our culture today not only tolerates anger, but almost seems to encourage and celebrate it. Reality television that glorifies temper tantrums, shock jocks on the radio, biased newscasting from all perspectives designed solely to incite the listener against their supposed enemy somewhere. Online forums overflowing with vitriolic rants. And in all of this, we can all see what a wonderful world it has created. Anger. Such a universal, destructive, seemingly unavoidable element of life. What is all this anger doing to us? Even better, what is it saying to us? That is anger just some necessary evil we are left to struggle with, just part and parcel of being human, or is something more at work here? Is this universal affliction trying to speak to some deeper aspect of the human condition? Aristotle said, whoa. I think that's what he would have said. But as a perfect lead-in to his quote, Aristotle said anybody can become angry. Anybody can become angry. That is easy. I may get on with this eventually. But to be angry to the right degree, and at the right time, and for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. But notice, though, he raises the issue of rightful anger, that there might actually be a place for it, a good use of it. Well, beyond just raising our blood pressure and breaking up relationships in our world, is our anger actually attempting to push us to something deeper, something that might actually be helpful for us? Well, this is precisely the issue our text today examines. This by taking the question that can be asked of us almost every single day and turning it into a question that we are moved to ask our Savior, namely, what are you so angry about? This morning we pick up our study of Jesus' final week with the events of the second day of the week, Monday. Last week we saw Jesus arrive in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, greeted by an adoring throng there, only to weep over how lost the city was. Well, today we see a whole different side of Jesus. This morning begins with Jesus, he's on his way into the city, and as he's walking along, he sees a fig tree. He goes over to it, and finding no fruit on it, he proceeds to curse the tree, which subsequently we see withers and dies. He then heads into the temple, and he tears the place apart, overturning tables. He's driving people out. He's shouting. He's disrupting everything. You can well imagine the headlines for the day. Breaking news, right? Trouble at the temple. Carpenter creates chaos. Menacing Messiah, rabid rabbi, right? Obviously, I was in an alliterative mood this morning. Well, needless to say, this is not the way we normally picture Jesus. This is not Jesus meek and mild, healing the sick, taking children on his knees, so forth. No, this is an angry Jesus. This is a rough and tough Jesus. He's taking no prisoners, right? What's the problem? Is he just having an off day? Hasn't yet had that first cup of coffee, right? What gives? Why does Jesus lose his cool here? What is he so angry about? Well, right off the top, notice what he is bugged about in the temple, that the house of God has become corrupt. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers, he says. Basically, the law of Moses outlined how offerings were to be made and sacrifices purchased, but over time these rules had been manipulated and things had deteriorated into a religiously sanctioned system of price gouging and kickbacks to the temple authorities. For instance, the worship was based around sacrifices, and historians tell us that in Jesus' time, if you were poor and you could only purchase a dove for a sacrifice, you could buy it right outside the temple for about $1. But the priest would make a point of refusing that. So you had to purchase a dove from one of the vendors inside the temple when suddenly the price went up to $45, right? Of which the house, the temple, kept about 43, depending on how well the vendor could finagle the books. No wonder your offering was no good. Jesus is outraged over religious practices gone wrong, worse than wrong, actually hurtful rather than helpful to people. And this being part of the symbolism of the tree that he curses, that something that is supposed to be producing life, bearing fruit, is failing to do so. And thus he takes his first shots across the bow of the religious establishment, a confrontation that will increase over the days ahead, leading to the call for his death. But even deeper than this, though, notice what is really going on here, what is driving this corruption Jesus is attacking here. Once again, Jesus says, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." Notice his fundamental point, that the temple is not what God created it to be. This is what Jesus is really bugged about here. Something is not what God created it to be. Think about that. What does sin do at its most basic, most elemental level? Well, it causes God's creation to fail to be what God created it to be, right? Sin causes the world not to be what God created it to be. Sin causes society not to be what God created it to be. Sin causes the church not to be what God created it to be. Sin causes families, marriages, individuals, everything not to be what God created them to be. Many scholars claim that what Jesus actually expresses here is the most fundamental definition of the work of sin, namely God's creation gone wrong. And this is what Jesus is truly angry about here. What he's really angrily attacking is sin, the evil that seeks to take us down, to take life that God intends from us. And this is crucial. We tend to see anger as something inherently bad, at best a necessary evil. Far better, something we need to avoid and maybe repress because it will destroy us. But here Jesus himself is angry, leading to our salvation, thus demonstrating that anger in and of itself is not inherently bad. Rather, the issue is its focus and its purpose. That is, anger at its core is a good thing. Anger stems from a sense of something being wrong, some injustice that upsets us and that we refuse to accept. That's a good thing. As one scholar writes, anger is a divinely implanted emotion, closely allied to our instinct for right. It is designed to be used for constructive spiritual purposes. The person who cannot feel anger at evil is a person who lacks enthusiasm for good. If you cannot hate wrong, it's very questionable whether you really love righteousness. The inability to feel anger exposes a catastrophic moral void. A catastrophic moral void. In court, we judge a person's sanity by whether or not they can tell right from wrong. We should get angry about injustice and evil. But what happens, you see, is that the very sin that angers us takes hold of this anger and it twists it around against us. Sin causes us to misuse and misdirect our God-given anger, basically aiming our anger at the wrong things. At each other, at destroying rather than creating, at blaming rather than helping. In our current culture situation, simply becoming angry for anger's sake and believing that that's enough. Just write your blog, right? Who cares? Just get mad at an injustice, but don't actually go out and do something about it. All of this basically causing more brokenness and wrong and anger rather than correcting things. And we thus get caught in this ever-increasing cycle of frustration that we feel every day that seeks to consume and destroy us. Evil's taken us over, In effect, our anger is the sign pointing us to the fact that there is something wrong with us. We know that. We can feel it, right? But through this very wrong, the evil that's trying to take hold of us, it's then also the symptom of that wrong. It's the most basic expression, the most fundamental way it takes shape. It's the sign, it's the symptom, yet ironically, it's also the solution. That is, Jesus saves us through anger, by getting angry at the right thing, at sin, not the sinner. And he calls us to follow him there to salvation, to take our anger and give it to him that we might find life. To put it another way, the punchline of all this opening bit is, if you pardon the pun, is that if you want to get to the life God wants for you, to break free from not only the frustrating annoyance that so often overtakes you every day, but even deeper, the evil that continually seeks to control and destroy you and keep life as God created it from you, you need to focus on your anger. Go right there. That's the key. Give your anger over to Jesus and follow him into it. Now, what does this mean in a practical sense? Well, it means a couple of things. First, it means look at what makes you angry. Have you ever heard the old story of the very concerned husband who one day went to see his family doctor, and the man said, "Doc, I think my wife is deaf, right? She never hears me the first time I say something. In fact, I often have to repeat things over and over again." Well, the doctor replied, "Go home tonight, stand about 15 feet away from her, and say something. If she doesn't reply, move about 5 feet closer, try again, and keep doing this so we can get an idea of the severity of her deafness." Sure enough, the husband goes home and he does exactly as instructed. He stands about 15 feet from his wife, presently she's standing in the kitchen chopping some vegetables. "Honey, what's for dinner?" he asks. He gets no response. So he moves about 5 feet closer and he asks again, "Honey, what's for dinner?" No reply. He moves 5 feet closer, still no reply. Finally fed up, he moves right behind her, just about an inch away from her, and in a loud voice he asks one more time, "Honey, what's for dinner?" At this, his wife finally turns around and replies, "For the 4th time, we're having pot roast." You know? Quite often, our anger at others is actually just pointing to what's wrong with ourselves, right? This is where we start. Returning to where we began, to get hold of life God wants for us, we got to ask ourselves, what are you so angry about? We have to look at the things we're angry about all the time. Now, in this right off the top, we need to begin simply by considering how much of the stuff we're getting all worked up about doesn't really matter, isn't that important in the grand scheme of things, and particularly how what we're bugged about pales in comparison to all the good that's around us every day. So often we've just lost our perspective. It's like I have a friend who years ago, he told me about how much he hated his drive to work every day. Every day, coming and going, he had to sit in rush hour traffic, just creeping along. It aggravated him no end, right? Well, one day as he was inching along in traffic, really bugged, he saw a man standing on the side of the road, and he's holding a sign that was written on a piece of cardboard, and the sign read, "Will work for food." And right then, my friend realized that what angered him, this other person would gladly have traded him for, to just have a job. Are you angry about something that doesn't really matter, especially in light of just how good your life is, and you've lost sight of that? Jesus only got bugged about things that mattered, the big issues. We need to look at what we're angry about and first see frequently just how insignificant our anger is. But then even deeper to realize that if we'll look at our anger, we'll see specifically how sin has a hold of us. As one author writes, "Have you ever noticed how the following statements seem to be true? When another person behaves badly, he's rude. When I behave badly, I'm just having a bad day. When she's set in her ways, she's rigid. When I'm set in my ways, it's just determination. When he doesn't like other people, he's prejudiced. When I don't like other people, I'm just showing very good judgment. When someone picks at another's flaws, they're critical. When I pick at another's flaws, I'm just being constructive." Isn't that the way it often is? The worst things in others, we dress up as the best things in ourselves. Well, there's a simple rule to life. If you want to know what's wrong with you, just look for whatever you most often find wrong in others. There's always a direct correlation. The person who is greedy and grasping tends to see the whole world as greedy and grasping. The person who is untrustworthy tends to see others as untrustworthy. The person who is judgmental and harsh tends to see all people as judgmental and harsh. Conversely, the person who is caring tends to be conscious of the care of others. The person who is forgiving tends to be able to receive the forgiveness of others. The person who likes themselves tends to like all other people. Simply put, the things that we so often get angry about in this world and in others ultimately are revealing what is wrong with us, how evil's trying to get a hold of us if we're willing to look at it. If you're angry that no one seems to care about you, odds are you're not caring too much about anybody else. If you're always bugged that no one's doing what they're supposed to be doing, well, what are you doing, right? If your feelings are always hurt by inconsiderate people, is the real problem their rudeness or your pride? If we get angry about tiny things, odds are this is all our lives are about, tiny little things. Or even more pointedly, that we're using this anger at tiny things to avoid the great big things that God wants to work on in our lives. The subtext of all anger is this: I have met the enemy, and it is me. Our anger will reveal how sin has a hold of us, evil trying to grab us if we're willing to look. First absolutely necessary step in salvation, identify and confront what's wrong. Look at your anger. It is pointing at your illness. Right? One author writes, a man received notice that his son, during his senior year in high school, had failed a course. The father, determined that his son would attend the very best college, realized that a failing grade would jeopardize his son's chances to enter a top school. And the father's immediate reaction was to blame the teacher for his son's failing grade. Storming into the teacher's classroom, the father proceeded to accuse the teacher of unfairness. He threatened to have the teacher's job if the grade were not changed. The teacher, believing the grade was deserved, would not change the grade, and he held his ground. The father left the classroom in a heated rage and headed for the principal's office, where in a torrent he demanded the principal's intervention. The principal, knowing the situation and believing the teacher to be right, stood behind the faculty member and refused to intervene. The father's rage escalated, and he began to shout obscenities and to make threats against the principal. He would go to the school board and have the principal's job. At the very height of the tension, there was a brief pause, followed by these words from the principal: "Sir, I can see that you love your son very much." At that instant, the anger that had controlled the father suddenly melted away, and he became a shower of tears. The comment had struck a very deep nerve. Struggling to gather himself together, the father whispered, "Yes, I do love my son very much." And with that, he revealed all the ways he felt he had failed to spend time with his son, to help him and to care for him, how distant and self-involved he had been, and how guilty he felt about it as a father. He was taking his own lack of care out on the school. What we are angry about will tell us what's wrong with us, how evil's trying to get a hold of us and destroy us if we're willing to look there. First step in the crucial journey into anger to find life, look at what makes you angry. From this, then, secondly, place your anger on Jesus. Having discovered how evil has a hold of us, we then need to give this evil over to God. That is, we need to realize that we can't beat this on our own. Only Jesus can. We need to give our sin, revealed in our anger, over to Jesus to take to the cross. It's no longer ours, it's his. Die to it by putting him in charge of it. You know, this is the second mistake that we also often make. We try to handle evil, our sin, our anger, all on our own. You know, I just need to try harder. I need to learn to control myself. Basically, we repress rather than treat, and it's not a good approach. Not only does repression invariably lead to an explosion, either internal or external, but obviously, as with any sickness, a failure to treat the problem just allows it eventually to fester and to grow. It's like a cancer. We need to treat the problem, this by giving our sin to Jesus and putting him in charge of getting rid of it. Place those things that bug you, how evil's trying to get a hold of you in anger, on Jesus, and let him make something out of it. Whatever he wants, let him turn it into something good. As he does on the cross, he turns the most bad thing in the world into the greatest thing ever, right? If someone has hurt us, he'll say to reach out to them. If something needs to be done, being the one who does it. If something is needed, being the one who gives. To put it another way, giving our sin to Jesus that we might be healed of it involves, placing our sin on him. So likewise, giving our anger over to Jesus involves actually placing that anger upon him. Think of it this way. When you're angry, imagine that Jesus is the one that you're angry with. Imagine he's the one you're angry with. What would you do with your anger if that was the case? What would happen? How would you handle it, and what might result? Author Max Lucado explores exactly this idea. In his book, The Applause of Heaven, Lucado, he writes about this great big muscle-bound man named Daniel who was swindled really badly by his own brother. He vowed that if he ever saw his brother again, he would break his neck. Right? A few months later, Daniel became a Christian. Even so, he just couldn't forgive his brother. One day, the inevitable encounter took place on a very busy street in the city. And this is how Daniel described what happened. I saw my brother, but he didn't see me. Right away, I felt my fist clench and my face got hot. My initial impulse was to grab him around the throat and to choke the life out of him. But as I looked into his face, my anger began to melt, for as I saw him, I suddenly saw the image of my father, how much he looked like our father. I saw my father's eyes, I saw my father's look, I saw my father's expression. And as I saw my father in his face, my enemy once again became my brother. That brother then found himself wrapped in those big arms, but in a hug. The two stood in the middle of a river of people and wept, and Daniel's words bear repeating. When I saw the image of my father in his face, my enemy became my brother. See your heavenly Father in all your anger and act accordingly. The second step in the crucial journey into anger to find life, place your anger on Jesus. And then finally, third, Get angry about something that matters. Christian author Kim Sullivan writes, "Recently I had the most aggravating day. I got yelled at work. The commute home was horrible. I arrived home and discovered that my husband hadn't taken out the garbage as he had promised once again. I began to make dinner and I dropped and broke a glass. And with that, the kids started pestering me for help with their homework and fighting with one another. Finally, I yelled, 'I've had it. Everybody leave me alone.' And I stormed upstairs to my room and I slammed the door shut. About 5 minutes later, I noticed a little handwritten note being slid under the door. It was from my 6-year-old, and it read simply, 'Dear Mommy, isn't this a bit much?' P.S. When's dinner? Right? But isn't this a bit much? Right? Yeah. It's a great question, really. Particularly in regards to the insignificance of so much that we're always angry about. It has been said that in the final analysis, the core problem in our lives is not that we are too passionate about bad things, but rather that we are not passionate enough about good things. Not passionate enough about good things. This is the final lesson here. You want to drive the destructive anger out of your life for good? Get out of this frustrating, destructive loop of evil, solidify the 2 steps we just talked about? Then get angry about something that matters. Develop righteous anger instead of self-righteous anger. Instead of trying to push out bad, fill up on a whole bunch of good, And how do you tell the difference between common, destructive, self-righteous anger and divine, constructive, righteous anger? It's easy. As with Jesus' anger, righteous anger is ultimately concerned with the injustices occurred upon another, not oneself. And as Jesus' anger ultimately led him to be taken to the cross, paying the price, so righteous anger ultimately costs us. Ask only of oneself, not others. It serves others, not us. Basically, drive out all the petty annoyances that so often rule and destroy your life by developing a passion for the right. Find that cause that truly moves you and give your all to it. Anger is finally, it's all about passion, right? An intense desire for right, in which, as Jesus demonstrates in Holy Week, life can either be found or lost. We so often die, we are consumed by tiny annoyances because we miss all this. We either waste our time on insignificant pettiness, or we settle for some sort of bland life of commitment to nothing. Either approach ultimately stripping the life God wants from us. There is an old Franciscan blessing that says, "May God bless you with great discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with overwhelming anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that you may hope for justice, freedom, and peace. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference, so that you will do what others claim could never be done." We should get angry. We should get angry at poverty. We should get angry at prejudice. We should get angry at oppression. We should get angry at the build-up for war, We should get angry at ignorance. We should get angry at suffering anywhere. There's something wrong with us if we don't. Get angry about something that matters and find life. In closing, consider the following. A few years ago, I read this news article that told of the story of a man named David Heim, age 47, of Marlborough, Massachusetts. A man more commonly known as the wheelchair recycler, although that wasn't always his title. In 1995, Heim became paralyzed in a car accident. And needless to say, he became incredibly angry. He was angry at the driver who hit him. He was angry at the doctors who failed to heal him. He was angry at God for allowing all this to happen. And as he went through his recovery, he discovered a brand new thing to get angry about: his wheelchair. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. It didn't even fit him. He had a hard time using it. Well, Heim had always been a kind of a mechanically inclined individual, and so he began working on his wheelchair, eventually adapting it to his own needs and becoming quite proud of his accomplishment. Other paralyzed individuals saw what he had done, and they asked him to work on their chairs. And this he gladly did, and word began to spread about that he was the man to go to. Long story short, today, 22 years later, Heim runs a nonprofit organization that takes used wheelchairs and donated parts and makes brand new wheelchairs for those who cannot afford them, and specifically tailors each chair for the individual. Haim so far has helped thousands of people across the country and the world. People are mobile, have independence, who might never have known such blessings. The effect on so many lives has been quite profound, but the effect on Haim has been perhaps the most noteworthy. He's no longer angry at all. Rather, he now finds tremendous happiness in life, helping people. He says that people return to him who have received one of his chairs, and they hug him, weeping for joy. Out of his anger, he found a cause beyond himself to which he has given himself. Selfish passion has become selfless passion, which has rescued him from his pain. What are you so angry about? Anger is the sign, the symptom, and the solution to what keeps us from what God created us to be. Jesus gets angry and invites us to follow him into life. Look at what makes you angry. Place your anger on Jesus and get angry about something that really matters. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 402 in the red hymnal, Lord, I Want to Be a Christian. Would you please stand?